Hey guys, welcome back. Fonz King here with King's Photography and More, and this is part 2 to the introduction to photography. So I hope you took the time to watch the first video and also took the time to figure out how to change your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. Those three things are very important when it comes to photography because they kind of are photography. So I want to go over what ISO, shutter speed, and aperture are. So ISO, once again, stands for International Standards Organization, and that's more or less your old school film speed. Okay, it's the sensor in your camera. It's where the image ends up. That's the easiest way to think of it. Okay, so when you take a picture, back in the day, it used to go to film, which would go here. Now it goes to a sensor. Okay, the sensor is basically in the same place that the film used to be, and the ISO is your film speed, but we don't use film anymore, so we just call it ISO. All right, so you have an ISO of 100. The ISO of 100 requires a lot of light. Okay, it's going to give you the best quality. You can also have like an ISO of 6400. Requires a lot less light, but it's going to be a lower quality image for the most part. Now, before you start making comments about this in the comments section, I know camera companies have come a long way in the last couple of years, and the higher ISOs, the quality has gotten much, much better. And for the most part, the human eye is not going to notice the difference between an ISO of, say, 100, an ISO of 1600, an ISO of 6400, but there is a difference there, and knowing that is important. So we're just going to play it safe and say an ISO of 100 is going to give you the best image you can. ISO of 6400, it's going to give you an image, but not as good as ISO 100. Okay? So ISO 100, that's reserved for, say, in studio with flash, outside on a sunny day. 6400, that's a lower light setting. Okay? So once again, an ISO of, say, 100, you're going to need a lot of light. It's going to give you a great image. ISO, as you go up in the ISOs, you're going to require less light, but the image quality is going to be reduced. Okay, next up we have shutter speed, and that's the amount of time that the shutter is open. It's pretty self-explanatory. And you can have some really slow shutter speeds, like 1 over 30, so that's a 30th of a second, which is relatively slow in the photography world. You can also have it to minutes, like I've taken photos that have been a half hour long. You can have really, really fast shutter speeds that are going to be like 1/4000th of a second. That's fast enough to freeze a bullet in time, okay? So it gets a little crazy. So shutter speed, that's the amount of time that the shutter in your camera is open. And right here, once again, this is the shutter, right? Now, the next thing that we have is the aperture. And the aperture is the opening in the lens. Now, I don't know if you can really see it here, but you can adjust the size of the opening in your lens to let more light in or let less light in. It's a bit of a tongue twister right there. So yeah, so everything that you do with your camera is about regulating light. From your ISO to your shutter speed to your aperture, it's all about how much light you're going to let into your camera, okay? So how sensitive your sensor is going to be, that's the ISO. How long you're going to let the sensor be exposed to light, that's the shutter speed. And how much light you're going to pass through it, that's the aperture, okay? So you have your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO. No one of these is more important than the other. Okay, so when we think about the settings in the camera, such as the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture, the number one question I get asked is, which one should I start with? And there's no right answer, okay? You can start with your shutter speed, you can start with your aperture, you can start with your ISO. I usually start with my ISO because it's the final step, okay? It's the sensitivity of the sensor, and if you have a lot of light, well, then you can have a lower ISO number. If you don't have as much light, you're going to need a higher ISO number. So first thing I usually do is look at the lighting situation that I'm working in. If I'm outside on a bright sunshiny day, ISO 100, 100% of the time. Now, if we don't have a lot of light, this is going to affect how we adjust our ISO as well. Let's say we're in a really dark setting. Let's say it's nighttime. Do we have a tripod? Do we want this photo to be grainy? Do we not want it to be grainy at all? Is the subject moving? Is the subject stationary? These are all things that we need to think about. And it's the type of thing that there's no right or wrong answer for any of it. It's just what you want to achieve in the image and the tools that you have at your disposal. Do you have a flash? Do you have lots of lights? Do you have a tripod? Right? If you have all of these things, well, you can do whatever you want. If you are hand-holding that camera and you don't have a flash and you're working in a low light setting, well, that's going to limit what you can do with your camera. This is how photography gets expensive, because for every missed photographic opportunity, it requires the purchase of 2 new pieces of equipment. All right, so that's how to choose the ISO. I know it doesn't really answer your question, but as you move forward in taking pictures, it will. Right now, we're going to be working indoors for the most part in a lower light setting, so you're going to want to bring that ISO up, okay? We're going to get to homework in a little while on what pictures you're going to take around the house and what you're going to take pictures of. Right now, I just want you to remember that ISO of 100 requires a lot of light. ISO of 6400 requires a lot less light. ISO 100, it's going to give you a higher quality image. ISO 6400, lower quality image. Okay, so shutter speed is the speed of the shutter. How much time you're going to let the sensor be exposed to light, okay? So once again, we're working with a bright sunshiny day outside. We don't need as much light exposed to that sensor. But if we're working indoors, like many of us are now, we're going to want to expose that sensor a little longer. I'm getting tongue-tied here, okay? So we're going to want to expose the sensor a little bit longer to light, okay? And once again, that's the shutter speed, all right? So we can have that shutter open for 1/125th of a second, okay? Or 1/400th of a second, or 1/4000th of a second. Okay, 4,000th of a second, that's extremely fast. Or we could expose that sensor for minutes. We could do a minute, 2 minutes. All right, so here's an example that I plan on doing again due to all the social distancing that's currently ongoing. This is a great way to keep people from getting too close to you. You take some steel wool, you put it inside a whisk, you set it on fire, and you spin it around. So this is a slow shutter speed, all right? This is a 30-second exposure. This is me playing with steel wool and fire for about 30 seconds in my backyard. It was winter when I shot this. It's a lot of fun to do. Everybody remembers baseball? Well, fast shutter speed. You can see that the ball is frozen in time, all right? This is about 1,000th of a second, okay? Just to give you an idea. So we've got slow shutter speed. This is about 30 seconds of me spinning around steel wool on fire. This is a fast shutter speed, about an ISO or a shutter speed of 1/1000. Okay, we're going to freeze that baseball in time. Slow shutter speed. Here's some waves down at Middle Cove Beach. Kind of looks like a painting, right? Camera's put on a tripod. I've dropped the shutter speed down to about half second-ish. I don't know exactly what it was at the time. Fast shutter speed. Me dropping sugar cubes into coffee. And I have a little time on my hands, so I may update these soon. Next up, we have aperture. So the aperture, that's basically the opening in your lens. It's what the light travels through to get to the shutter, to pass by the shutter, and to hit the sensor inside your camera. So the smaller the number, the bigger the hole. The bigger the number, the smaller the hole, okay? So the smaller the number, the more light is going to be let into your camera. The bigger the number, the less light that's going to be let into your camera, okay? So once again, if it's a bright sunshiny day, you may want to use an f-stop of, say, f16. Shutter speed of 1/125 and an ISO of 100, right? So that's if we're outside shooting on a bright sunshiny day. Okay, now inside, everybody's light is going to be different inside. I don't know how much light is coming through the windows. I don't know how powerful or how many light bulbs you have in the room. So it's very hard for me to say what your camera should be set at to take a picture indoors. I can tell you what it's going to be outside on a sunshiny day. So if it's sunny outside right now and you want to go out on your front step or your back patio to take a picture, by all means, pause the video and go do it. But these are the settings that will work on a bright sunshiny day. It's called the Sunny 16 rule, and it's an ISO of 100, a shutter speed of 1/125, and an f-stop of f16. Okay? ISO of 100, shutter speed 1/125, and an aperture of f16. That will give you a proper exposure, providing your subject is lit by the sun. Okay? Perfect. Okay, now, so everything once again goes back to this light meter. All right, so to get a proper exposure, you're going to see that little knobby thing, that little bar, move from the left to the right, from overexposed to underexposed. Center is a proper exposed image, okay? A properly exposed image, that little dooflicky is going to end up just under 0. So it'll have no bars under the negative side, no bars under the plus side. It'll be right in the middle. That's a properly exposed image, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And we're going to achieve that by adjusting your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. We're going to regulate the light that travels into your camera. Okay, so if you're in a darkened room right now, you're going to want to set it to the lowest F number you have. In many cases for you guys, that's going to be 3.5 to 5.6. Okay, so that's going to be the largest opening that your camera has. Next, we're going to want to set it up with a slower shutter speed. So we're going to drop that shutter speed down to like 1/80, 1/60. You don't really want to go much lower than 1/60 because you're going to have a hard time holding the camera steady. So as you change your shutter speed and as you change your aperture, look through your camera. You'll notice your light meter. Is it in the center yet? No? Well, okay, next thing we have is your ISO. You're going to want to bring that ISO up until your light meter gets to 0. Okay, this concludes video number 2. Your homework, until I get the next videos made, is to wander around your house or just outside your house, adjusting your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed until you get to 0, and then take pictures. And once again, you're going to look through here, you're going to push down on the shutter release to take a picture. Next class, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get things in focus. In many cases, you're going to want to use your autofocus, which works great. Just set your camera to autofocus. Go through your owner's manual, find out how to do that. Set your camera to autofocus, and all you need to do is push down halfway on your shutter release, and autofocus will kick in. Okay? So that's how you're going to focus and then take a picture. But the biggest thing that I want you guys to practice is proper exposures. So change your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO until that light meter gets to 0. Have fun. And in the next class, we're going to be talking a little bit about composition and depth of field, okay? And once again, we're going to be going over ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, and light meters again. And we'll also talk a little bit about white balance. Right now, make sure your white balance is just set to auto. You can use autofocus, but what I want you to do is make sure your camera is set to manual and you're changing your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Till next time, happy picture taking.